will still be here if you checked back in 100 years. I mean, I would say they're all on a rapid road to extinction.
I think each of these rights was on a rapid road to extinction before the pandemic. I think as the world has rapidly come together and flattened in a certain extent, their path toward extinction has only increased, only sped up. I would be surprised if any of these were here in a century, especially as they currently exist. I think that, there are a lot of custodians and a lot of communities trying to modify and evolve these traditions in a more economically friendly way, whether by appealing to tourists, whether by changing where these traditions exist, trying to introduce different communities to them. But there's a fine line between maintaining a tradition and commodifying it, and I would be shocked if any of these things were still around in 100 years.
Maybe the reality is they will be extinct, but through these, appreciating these, we can see some of the beauties of different cultures. What is the practical takeaway from all of this? If somebody reads your book from cover to cover, how are they going to be better connected with their world?
I think you've touched on something really important. We lose 9 languages every year. Nearly 3,000 towns and villages in Spain are at risk of becoming depopulated. A local minister in Japan painted the risk of what he called local extinction. I think that as people increasingly speak the same languages, live in the same cities, eat the same foods, we're becoming a more homogenous species. And I think for those of us who travel to be stirred by the unfamiliar and enthralled by the boundless depths of how the natural world affects human expression, that's a shame. These sort of quiet rites remind me of how wondrously diverse and stunning the world can be. And I think when you lose these things, and when people migrate to cities more and more and kind of shed these distinct elements of who we are and where we came from, there's a certain sadness in that. And so what I'm hoping with this book is just to remind people that the world can still be a very wondrous place despite all of the doom and gloom out there. And in a certain extent, it's a celebration of the human spirit and perseverance that against all odds, these things still exist. I mean, one way of looking at it is, yes, there's a sadness in these things being lost, but at the same time, what does it say about a place like Sweden, one of the most modern, industrialized nations on Earth, that hundreds and hundreds of years after appointing a night watchman, this thing still exists? I think that's actually lovely and something to celebrate.
Elliot, thank you so much, because in a lot of ways, you are a custodian of wonder, which is the name of your book, and hopefully, inspired by your book, we can all become custodians of cultural wonder. Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks so much, Rick.
Travel with Rick Steves is produced at Rick Steves Europe in Edmonds, Washington, by Tim Patton, Casimir Hall, and Donald Arsley. Amber Wakeley and Sherry Ford upload the shows to our website. Our theme music was written and performed by Jerry Frank. Affiliate relations are by Sheila Russo. Thanks to Gretchen Strong for reading our listener travel haiku. Send us what you've written about your travel impressions. There's a link at ricksteves.com/radio.
This is a test of the emergency alert system. This has been a test of the emergency alert system. This is KWGS HD1 Tulsa.
Support for Public Radio Tulsa is provided by the Kendall College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Tulsa, preparing students for life and leadership for 130 years. More at artsandsciences.utulsa.edu.
From the University of Tulsa, this is Public Radio 89.5, KWGS HD1 Tulsa.
Funding freezes, mass layoffs of federal scientists. How are scientists responding? I'm Flora Lichtman, and this is Science Friday. Under increasing threats from the Trump administration, some leaders in science are calling for their colleagues to take action.
destruction for the ill-conceived notions of cutting costs. Didn't put an American on the moon, and it didn't wipe smallpox from the face of the earth.
We'll talk to Sudip Parikh of the American Association for the Advancement of Science about fighting back. Plus, a new vaccine shows promise in early trials to prevent recurrence of one of the deadliest cancers. That's after this.
Of killing the CEO of United Healthcare in New York late last year is scheduled to appear in a state courtroom this hour. NPR's Adrian Florido reports Luigi Mangione is facing state murder and terrorism charges.
This will be Mangione's first court appearance since his arraignment in December. Prosecutors and Mangione's defense lawyers are expected to provide updates on the status of the case. Mangione has pleaded not guilty to the December killing of Brian Thompson outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel. Thompson was shot on the sidewalk as he walked to an investor conference. Mangione also faces federal charges that could carry the possibility of the death penalty. Thompson's killing sparked a public outpouring of resentment toward U.S. health insurance companies. On social media, people swapped stories of being denied coverage and stuck with huge bills. United Healthcare is the biggest medical insurer in the country. Adrian Florido, NPR News.
We've just learned that the federal judge overseeing the corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams has opted not to rule immediately on the Justice Department's request to drop the prosecution. Instead, the judge has appointed an outside attorney to present an independent perspective. NPR's Ryan Lucas joins us now.
U.S. District Judge Dale Ho has appointed Paul Clement as a so-called friend of the court to help consider the Justice Department's unopposed motion to drop the case. Clement served as Solicitor General during the George W. Bush administration. Judge Ho's decision comes days after the Justice Department formally requested to dismiss the Adams case. The department says the request isn't based on the strength of the case. Instead, it says the prosecution hinders Adams' ability to help the Trump administration with immigration enforcement. The interim U.S. attorney in Manhattan and at least 6 other senior Justice Department attorneys resigned in protest. Ryan Lucas, NPR News, Washington.
The shutoff of funding by the U.S. Agency for International Development continues to take a toll, forcing major layoffs at a D.C. think tank that monitors democracy overseas. NPR's Frank Langford has more.
Freedom House, which does an annual analysis of political freedom around the world, plans to lay off 76 people at its headquarters here by mid-April. The organization receives most of its funding from the federal government. Freedom House, along with the National Endowment for Democracy, is among a number of pro-democracy organizations that are laying off or furloughing workers because of the funding hole. The federal district judge has twice ordered USAID to restart millions in payments to the organizations, but the Trump administration says it has the right to cancel contract grants one by one. Lawyers for the organizations have asked the judge to find the government in contempt of court, potentially setting the stage for a constitutional crisis.
That's NPR's Frank Langford reporting from Washington. Elon Musk is downplaying a report in the Financial Times that a Japanese investment group wants Tesla to invest in Nissan now that Nissan's merger talks with Honda have collapsed. Late last year, Nissan announced plans to eliminate 9,000 jobs worldwide. It's NPR. Health officials say the measles outbreak in West Texas has now grown to 90 cases. As vaccination rates drop and cases rise across the United States, experts say some groups of adults may need to get re-vaccinated. NPR's Ava Koch has the latest.
Measles is incredibly contagious. Infectious disease experts say the best defense is vaccination. If you've received 2 doses of the measles vaccine, as is routine today, you have a 95% or better chance of being completely protected throughout your life. However, if you were vaccinated before 1968, talk to your doctor about getting re-vaccinated, because early versions of the measles vaccine did not work as well as the current shot. People vaccinated between 1968 and 1989 got 1 dose of the vaccine. In most cases, experts say that's plenty of protection. Certain people, such as those living amidst a measles outbreak, should ask their doctor if they need a second dose. Ava Kokech, NPR News.
This winter's higher mortgage rates and home prices are putting a chill on home buying. The National Association of Realtors is reporting a nearly 5% decline in January's existing home sales compared to the month before. Ford says it is recalling roughly 240,000 Explorer and Lincoln Aviator SUVs. The automaker is reporting the vehicle's seatbelt anchors may be improperly secured. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says a loose seatbelt or a loose buckle may fail to keep its occupant properly restrained and safe in the event of a collision. I'm Lakshmi Singh, NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive, with small business insurance for protecting a variety of business types with multiple coverage options, designed to fit business owners' needs. More about small business insurance is at progressivecommercial.com.
Support for Public Radio Tulsa is provided by the Ann and Henry Zarrow Foundation, committed to supporting nonprofits that alleviate hunger, reduce homelessness, and improve mental health and healthcare access in Oklahoma. More at zarrow.org.
A listener-supported service of the University of Tulsa. Public Radio 89.5, KWGS HD1, Tulsa.
This is Science Friday. I'm Flora Lichtman. Later in the hour, the CEO of one of the oldest scientific societies, the AAAS, joins us to talk about his rallying cry for scientists as threats to science mount. But first, some news that takes us to a valley in Egypt. This week, archaeologists report one of the biggest Egyptian archaeological finds in modern history, the tomb of a pharaoh, King Thutmose II. This is the first pharaoh tomb find in over 100 years. The last one was King Tut's in 1922. Joining me to sift through the details of this story and other news from the week is Maggie Kurth, science writer and editorial lead of Carbon Plan, based in Minneapolis. Welcome back, Maggie.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk about this very cool discovery. Who was buried in this tomb?
So this is the tomb of Thutmose II. He's actually a dynastic predecessor of King Tutankhamun. So he died around 1479 BC, which is about 150 years before King Tut took the throne. So this tomb was found in 2022, and at the time, archaeologists actually thought it might be a queen's burial because it was really close to some other queenly tombs, including the wife of King Thutmose II, Hatshepsut. But there was a ton of ancient flood damage in this tomb, and it had destroyed a lot of the interior, and it had also cemented dirt and debris in front of the door. So it actually took a really long time to get in there and start figuring out whose tomb it really was. What's really interesting about this, though, is that his body was not there. So what they found was this kind of empty tomb. There are relics that have his name on them that they kind of tie this to King Thutmose. But his body was actually discovered back in the 19th century in an entirely different location far away.
Why?
Well, so the floods. So the archaeologists say that this tomb showed signs that it was severely flooded out shortly after it was completed. And there's also evidence that most of his burial goods and his body were moved shortly after that. So this was the tomb that was dug for him, that was made for him, that he was originally buried in. And then it just got flooded out and he got moved elsewhere.
Why did it take so long to find this tomb?
There's just a lot of things buried out there. And they, from what I can tell, they just discovered the stairs of this while they were doing other excavations in the area.
Let's move on. A lot of listeners are living in a world right now that is covered with regular old ice, Earth ice. There's a new finding about some weird alien ice. What's that about?
Yeah. Well, so they're calling this plastic ice, but it's not really plastic. It just has plasticity. So this stuff has a crystalline molecular structure like ice, but the individual molecules in that structure are able to kind of rotate around in a way that's more like how molecules in water move. So plastic ice could be molded or deformed, and the descriptions that scientists gave to reporters at Science News make it sound a little like those Gucci gel packs you kind of sometimes get with flowers at the grocery store. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, right. Nobody's actually touched it, though. So getting plastic ice to form in a lab for the first time required temperatures higher than 300 Celsius and a pressure of nearly 900,000 psi. And for context, the bottom of the Marianas Trench is about 16,000 psi.
Wow, so high temperature, high pressure.
Right, yes.
That's interesting. I think of ice as cold.
I do as well, but it turns out that there are weirdly a lot of different forms of ice, at least 20 of them. And they all have different crystalline structures that form because of different temperature and pressure combinations. So the natural ice that you and I are most familiar with, you could call it natty ice if you wanted to, that has...
I will. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That has a kind of honeycomb lattice. Ice 7, in contrast, has this dense cube structure like a Rubik's Cube. And this newly observed ice is actually a plastic form of Ice 7. So same cube structure, more molecular wiggles.
Would it clink in a drink? That's really my burning question about this.
That is an interesting question. They did not say, but the regular Ice 7, that has been found on Earth inside of diamonds.
Whoa. Where might this plastic ice be found?
Well, so up until recently, it was only theoretical. Scientists think it might have once existed inside of the high-pressure centers of icy moons like Europa, back when they were still forming.
Wow. Let's head back to Earth. There's some troubling news out of the Southwest. Tell me about this measles outbreak.
Yeah, it's bad. Cases more than doubled over the last week. So as of Wednesday, there were 58 cases, 13 hospitalizations across 5 West Texas counties. And most of them are in this one very rural county called Gaines County, south of Lubbock. So this is a county with a population density of like 14 people per square mile, which is lower than average in the U.S. for even unincorporated areas. And the fact that measles is spreading this fast in a place that's that isolated tells you a lot about measles and about the drivers of this outbreak.
Yeah, well, what does it tell us?
Well, so measles is really good at spreading from person to person. It's one of the most contagious viruses out there. You know, people who aren't vaccinated, 90% of them who get exposed will get measles. And Gaines County has one of the lowest vaccination rates in the entire state, according to reporting by the Texas Tribune. So the outbreak has been centered in the county's Mennonite community, and they tend to mostly avoid the healthcare system in general.
How can people protect themselves from measles?
So the big thing is just get vaccinated and vaccinate your kids. You know, a lot of people can recover safely at home from measles, but babies and younger children are really vulnerable. Kids can end up so dehydrated they can't even cry. It's pretty common for it to lead to pneumonia in younger children, and it can cause more rare lethal complications like brain inflammation. It's also able to suppress the immune system for months after infection, which is a big deal when we're also in the middle of one of the worst flu seasons in recent memory.
Let's move on to a more hopeful health story. There's a new study about a man who seemed almost certain to develop Alzheimer's because of his genes, but he's symptom-free and he's in his 70s. Tell me about this.
Yeah. So there's this really cool story in Live Science this week, and the man is Doug Whitney. His family had had multiple cases of a rare form of genetically linked Alzheimer's. His mother had it, 11 of her 13 siblings had it. They were all experiencing symptoms by the time they were in their 50s. And 14 years ago, Whitney enrolled himself in this large trial at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. He was 61 at the time. He had no symptoms of the disease, and he sort of assumed he had managed to just not get the genetic mutations that had harmed so many of his family members. But from the studies that he enrolled himself in, it turned out that he actually had at least one of these mutations. And the brain scans showed that his brain was full of the kind of amyloid beta plaques that are usually the first step to developing Alzheimer's. But he was fine, and he continues to be fine.
Wow, so do scientists understand what's happening?
There's still a lot they're trying to figure out, but though he had like these amyloid protein plaques in his brain, Alzheimer's patients usually have these tangles of a different kind of protein called tau, and the interaction between the two proteins might be what hastens cognitive decline. So one of the things the scientists are trying to figure out is why he has plaques but no tangles, and they still aren't sure. One really cool hypothesis about why he doesn't have these tau tangles is that he was a shipboard mechanic in hot boiler rooms as a job for many, many years. And it turns out there are changes in the cerebrospinal fluid that happen when the human body is protecting itself from extreme heat that can also protect itself from misfolded proteins like tangles. So the scientists are speculating that it might turn out that his job ended up protecting him from Alzheimer's.
Wow. Does this point to any new avenues for treatment or prevention?
It's all really still in very early stages of research, so it's not really leading to treatments yet, but studying Whitney is really helping researchers understand how Alzheimer's works. And eventually, it might also tell us a lot about how the process of the disease could be slowed.
Okay, last story. We now know that coral can go for a walk. I need every detail.
So this is not like big reef corals that live in huge stationary communities. This is a species of coral called a mushroom coral. They're kind of roundish. They're squishy. They have like that stone-like structure, but it's on the inside of their bodies. So they look a little bit like the videos I watched. They look a little bit like a living muffin top.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I know. But the scientists have known for a very long time these things can move in so much as that they're not in the same place where you left them from day to day. And in the 80s, Japanese scientists caught it on camera for the first time. But now researchers are using better equipment to really measure and sort of see and understand how that movement happens. And it's weird little hops.
That's what I was going to ask. What does it look like?
Yeah, they hop. They kind of like gear their bodies up and just sort of like throw themselves forward just a tiny bit. And then they just do that again over and over and over. And in about 6 hours, a mushroom coral can cross a piece of paper the short way.
I love it. I love it so much. The mushroom coral in the hair is what it's serving for me.
Yes, we should all embrace the philosophy of the mushroom coral and just take our time.
Can they walk away from their boiling ocean habitat?
I mean, slowly.
Thank you so much, Maggie.
Thank you.
Maggie Kurth, science writer and editorial lead of Carbon Plan, based in Minneapolis. We have to take a break. When we come back, as the Trump administration cuts jobs and spending in the hopes of making things more efficient, scientists say real efficiency might come from other changes.
Imagine if the next person is going to do something profound, somebody like Einstein. Instead of being in the laboratory that night, she's filling out paperwork for travel. That's my nightmare.
Stay with us. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
Also presents the original Broadway musical Title of Show, Friday, March 7th through Sunday, March 9th at the Theater Tulsa Studios at 5521 South Peoria. This quirky, laugh-out-loud musical follows two aspiring writers and their talented friends as they try to write, compose, and perform an original musical in just 3 weeks. The title of the show is recommended for mature audiences. Information at theatertulsa.org.
Support for Public Radio Tulsa is provided by the Kendall College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Tulsa, helping students transform their passions into fulfilling professions and meaningful lives. More at artsandsciences.utulsa.edu.
Public radio in HD from the University of Tulsa. Public Radio 89.5, KWGS HD1, Tulsa.
This is Science Friday. I'm Flora Lichtman. Last week, at one of the biggest national science gatherings, the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, its CEO, Sudip Parikh, gave a rousing speech to scientists.
Destruction for the ill-conceived notions of cutting costs didn't put an American on the moon, and it didn't wipe smallpox from the face of the earth.
Sudip was referring, of course, to the Trump administration's cuts to jobs and proposed spending cuts across the federal science and health agencies. We've heard a lot about these cuts over the last few weeks, as well as cancellation of grants that include certain derivative words, disappearing data from agency websites. So today we're drilling down. What is happening, and how should the science community respond? Dr. Sudip Parikh is the CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and executive publisher of the Science family of journals. He's based in Arlington, Virginia. Welcome to Science Friday.
Flora, thanks so much for having me.
I want to start out by playing another clip from your speech that really struck me.
This next month is probably one of the most important months in the history of science and technology in this country.
That's an arresting statement. Tell me what you mean.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of, I'll call it activity in the last 30 days, and much of it seems arbitrary and indiscriminate. Not really showing signs of a strategy for how to make America competitive. I am incredibly sad and frustrated for the scientists and researchers and others who were let go in this. That doesn't change the funding level yet. We have what's called a continuing resolution that is funding the U.S. government right now, and it ends on March 14th. And March 14th becomes a really important day because that's the day that we have to have a new spending bill for the United States government, and that will set spending levels for the rest of fiscal year 2025 for the federal government and the federal agencies. And so if the numbers that are provided in that spending bill are lower based on the actions that we've seen over the past 30 days, those would get locked in, and it would be really hard to pull back out of it. Those spending levels take a long time to increase, and the United States has been investing in science for 80 years, and we could tear a lot of that down with the stroke of one signature and the votes of the legislative body.
Yeah, during your talk, you said that you don't want science to be on the back foot. So what is your specific call to action for scientists?
Yeah, there's a lot of things for scientists to do. The first is to ensure that we're telling our stories, and telling our stories in multiple spaces. And so I always encourage scientists to speak with their representatives in their home districts. So when you are, wherever you live, find out who is your member of Congress and go have a discussion with them about what science is doing, first of all, in your community. What is the research that you do? How does it benefit your community? How does it benefit the country? And what effect the cuts that are proposed might have on your own community. It's important to make sure to make that connection to the community, though. Telling the story of the scientist is one thing, and it's very important. But a lot of this is really important to every American. Our entire modern society is based on science and technology, the investments that we've made throughout the past, but sometimes we've lost that connection. So that's one, is to tell our stories to our representatives. The second is, and some folks will, make this very active. There are going to be folks who are going to want to speak out publicly, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think it's important to be thoughtful in what we say, and I think that sometimes that does provide some pressure. And then there are those who need to be working in Washington to ensure that that energy gets translated into specific and concrete asks of Congress and of the executive branch. So all that needs to happen in concert for the next 3 weeks.
You said there's nothing wrong with speaking out publicly, and it catches my ear because it wouldn't occur to me that there would be something wrong with speaking out publicly. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's sometimes a worry that speaking out publicly is going too far, it's going over a limit. I just think that scientists in general, we like the safe space of our laboratories and our research ecosystems, but there is certainly something important about participating in the public discussion, the public discourse.
The argument being made by this administration is that there's a lot of waste in government, including at science and health agencies. And, there's been a lot of criticism of how the administration is going about fixing that. But do you think there's something to the premise that science could run more efficiently?
Absolutely. Everything can run more efficiently, and science is no exception. And that requires looking at it with focus and with the strategy involved, and looking at where we're trying to compete globally, and then making decisions about how you prioritize spending. And I don't think that means cutting spending. I think that means prioritizing spending. But what we've seen in the last 30 days is not that. What we've seen in the last 30 days is incredibly arbitrary. I just look at some of the cuts at the National Institutes of Health, cuts of potential leaders for the Center for Alzheimer's and related dementias, which is a priority for everyone. These diseases don't know politics, and they've had bipartisan support. But because the new leader is just coming in and is still in their probationary period, they've been let go. That's arbitrary. It shows no relationship to what we actually value as a country and what we see as priorities for what we need to be investing in. And so we've got to make sure that when we do the work of saying, how do we make science even more responsive to the country, we do it in a strategic way, not a non-strategic way.
Well, how would you make science more responsive to the country? What would you do?
I think that science has to be rooted in our communities. And so we have several things. One is, for the past 80 years, we as a nation have been investing in basic research, sometimes that sounds even a little silly, but it ends up leading to many new things. So, for example, we had scientists going out into the ecological systems of America and around the world, looking at different bacteria, and then we were sequencing their DNA. And we saw random repeats in their DNA. And that turned into, eventually, gene editing technology called CRISPR, which is being used to cure sickle cell anemia right now. That connection is just extraordinary, and it comes from basic research. And so we've always had this investment in basic research. But then we also need to be responsive to our communities. We know that we want to be globally competitive. And so as you look around the country, I see efforts, for example, in Western North Carolina, where the textile industry has really suffered from global competition, efforts made to invest in science and technology to say, what are high-value things that we can do in this country with textiles that can compete globally? And that means listening to the community around and saying, what is it that you care about? Where do you feel like you have energy and knowledge that we can bring to bear for the United States to be more competitive and to build up our economy? And so that connection to our communities is something that we've lost over time as scientists. And I really hope over the next few years, as we come out of this and we look forward, that we are rebuilding those connections, because there are scientists almost in every neighborhood in the country.
Do you think that this lack of connection to community is partly why we are seeing distrust of science and expertise and universities?
I think that's a big part of it. If you look at the relationships that you build them based on knowledge of people. It's not advertising campaigns. It is about relationships that are built over time. Trust is gathered in teaspoons and lost in buckets. And so you have to build those relationships. And you can't do that unless you're actually showing up as a scientist. Showing up at a PTA meeting at your child's school, showing up at the city planning meeting as you talk about what should be in your neighborhood. And then you can have a conversation about what it is you actually do. And that connection, when it's lost, makes it, we're so good at science and technology that we make it invisible. Our water is clean. We have plentiful food. We have clean air. We have an economy that is bustling. These are things that rely on investments in science and technology by our federal government.
Well, how do you fire scientists up to go be engaged with their communities? Fire them up. Here's your chance. We have a lot of scientist listeners. Get them going.
Look, the scientific enterprise is probably the most powerful thing we've ever built as humans for progress for the planet. It's built up economies. It's pulled people out of extreme poverty. It's made it to where we can then think about art and music and other things that we really appreciate in life. It's created that. And as scientists, we are the ones who are helping to build that, helping to expand that base of knowledge so that something new comes along. And if we don't tell our own story, who will? Who will tell that story? Who will tell the story of how the basic research leads to the cure? No one else. We have to do that.
I want to go back to some of the problems and how you might solve them. What do you think are the legitimate challenges to the scientific system right now, besides sort of engaging with community? Like, where are the problem spots that needs fixing?
Yeah, I'll give you two really concrete examples. One is administrative burden on our scientists. Our scientists right now, we did some studies and we realized that about 46 to 50% of their time is spent on administrative tasks. So can you imagine if the next person who's going to do something profound, somebody like Einstein, that instead of being in the laboratory that night, she's filling out paperwork for travel. That's my nightmare. I hope that doesn't happen, but that is administrative burden, and it can be relieved. Part of it is just saying, hey, can we standardize all the forms across government that are about bio sketches for proposals? Can we have the same one for the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, and the National Institutes of Health? That would be incredibly empowering for scientists. If we can reduce that burden, imagine giving that active scientist another 15 or 20% of their time back to actually think about science. The second thing is that we have to make it to where the sciences are actually a profession that you'd want to go into. One of the things that really worries me is that we've made it to where if you want to be a scientist, it's kind of a trial by fire. If you didn't in the 7th grade take Algebra 1, maybe you had a bad math teacher in 6th grade, maybe something happened at home in the 7th grade that wasn't good and it held you back a little bit. If you don't get into Algebra 1 in 7th grade, the chances of you becoming an engineer go down by drastic percentages. That shouldn't be the case. There should be many, many journeys into the science and technology fields. The second part of that is how in the world is someone who is perhaps has never gone, and no one in their family's ever gone to college before, if they get through college and we say, okay, now you're going to spend 4 or 5 years in graduate school, and then we're going to ask you to do postgraduate training, and during that time we're not going to pay you very much. In fact, you may need support from your parents. If we require a parental safety net for every scientist, it completely limits the talent pool for the folks who can go into it and then help us make that next discovery. And when we do that, when we make it not a great profession, here's the thing I think we miss. Michael Faraday was asked 150 years ago, what good are electrons? What are you doing with this stuff? And his answer was something I love, which is he said, I don't know, but someday you're going to tax them. And that's what we're missing, right? That's what science and technology do. They are so disruptive. They can make step changes in our economic growth, and that's how it's not a zero-sum game. It is actually expanding the world for everybody. And science and technology can do that in ways that nothing else can.
You've worked in government yourself. I mean, from 2001 to 2009, you were a science advisor to the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate Appropriations Committee. The politicization of science isn't brand new. I'm thinking of long-standing debates about teaching creationism in schools or the use of embryonic stem cells. What's your perspective on how things are different now?
One of the things that really makes me feel good is during my time on the Appropriations Committee, I realized that there were good people of goodwill on both sides of the aisle trying to figure things out for 95% of things, particularly in the sciences. And they wanted to support Alzheimer's research. They wanted to support science done by NASA. But then there were 5% of things that are very political, and they become enmeshed in culture wars. They become enmeshed in the world around us. And what I've learned is that those things are sometimes there are currents that are just too strong for any one sector to affect. And it means sometimes that science is one piece of the equation. And that can be frustrating for scientists. It can be really frustrating. It's frustrating for me. But I think that we've gotten this far. I mean, look at the world we live in. Galileo and Isaac Newton would be amazed at how far we've gotten. And I think now we're the generation that has to see that we can get to the next level, and that's quite a responsibility.
What's your message to young people who might be rethinking going into science right now?
Yeah, this is the thing I worry about most. I worry that just some of the things that have happened over the last 30 days they've been hard. They've been hard for the community. There's a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety, and I feel it too. What I would tell those early career scientists is that we are at the beginning of a story, and that story is still being written. I think the next 3 weeks matters. It matters a lot. But then there's more chances to engage. There are more opportunities to engage. And this is not a time in world history for us to pull back from our time in science and technology. If it weren't for that political climate, for that budget climate, just think of the opportunity. We are, just this past week, a neutrino was observed coming from somewhere out in space that had the highest energy we've ever seen.
Amazing story.
And it was,
yeah,
it was an amazing story. And it was, it was discovered by this partly built machine in the Mediterranean.
In the bottom of the sea, yeah.
The bottom of the sea. What an extraordinary time to be doing science. And so if curiosity is your thing, if wanting to expand the knowledge base of humanity is your thing, if wanting to help build a better world is your thing, man, there's not much better than science and technology.
Thank you, Sudip.
Thank you. What a wonderful conversation.
I agree. Dr. Sudip Parikh is CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and executive publisher of the Science family of journals. He's based in Arlington, Virginia. We have to take a break, but when we come back, a vaccine for one of the deadliest cancers in the U.S. is showing promise in early trials.
These current vaccines, which are preventing cancers from coming back after they have been removed with surgery, will be a key component to understanding the hows of an effective vaccine for cancer.
We will dive into the results. Stay with us. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
Science Friday is supported by MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. Support for Science Friday also comes from BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 30,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public. And from Progressive Insurance. With Snapshot from Progressive, safe drivers get personalized rates on car insurance. More at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Snapshot is not available in California or from all agents. Science Friday is produced by the Science Friday Initiative, dedicated to increasing the public's access to scientific information. ScienceFriday.com.
This week on Science Friday, this winter has been more pathogen-packed than usual. We are talking seasonal flu, norovirus, pneumonia, COVID, bird flu concerns. We'll explain what's going on. Plus, the mysteries of a mammal's tail.
I just think there's more to the tail than we've been giving it credit.
That's on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
The Trump administration's rhetoric on expansion has been pretty unpopular among Greenlandic citizens.
We will never surrender to anyone.
But there are some outliers.
From the first term, I was supporting him here in Greenland.
I'm Juana Summers in Greenland's capital with diverging views on Trump's ambitions here on All Things Considered from NPR News.
This afternoon at 4 on Public Radio 89.5.
Support for State Impact Oklahoma on Public Radio Tulsa is provided by the Oklahoma Securities Department, providing investor protection through education and enforcement of Oklahoma's securities laws. More at securities.ok.gov and 405-280-7700.
This is listener-supported public radio from the University of Tulsa. Public Radio 89.5, KWGS HD1, Tulsa.
This is Science Friday. I'm Flora Lichtman. A team at Memorial Sloan Kettering is developing a new vaccine for pancreatic cancer, which is notoriously difficult to treat. 90% of people who are diagnosed with pancreatic cancer die from the disease, which is what makes a new possible treatment so potentially exciting. A few years ago, the team embarked on a small trial to test the vaccine's safety. 16 patients with pancreatic cancer got it, and even though it was a small study, the results were promising. Half the participants saw an immune response, and in those patients, the cancer hadn't relapsed after 18 months. This week, the team released a new study in Nature following those same patients and found that most of them who responded to the vaccine in the first study had no recurrence, now about 3 years later. Joining me to talk about these results and what they could mean generally for the future of cancer treatment is Dr. Vinod Balachandran, Associate Attending Surgeon and Director of the Olayan Center for Cancer